I've been booked since 2023. They finally let me home on home confinement. Good to be home, but after 4 weeks, it still feels like I'm in prison. Officers are showing up to my house any time of the day. I can't leave the front door, and they piss me every 2 weeks. Only thing good about it is that I can eat, sleep, and whenever I want.
When people do the most, I do the analysis. Let's go. A few weeks ago, the Illinois Supreme Court quietly announced that it was creating something called the Pretrial Accountability Task Force. Now, I know that sounds boring, but stick with me because this could become one of the biggest criminal justice stories in Illinois this year. And it could eventually affect thousands of criminal cases across Illinois. So let's talk about it. First things first, what is a task force? I want you to think of a task force like a special committee, if you will. The Supreme Court has gathered up judges, police leaders, researchers. They have court officials, sheriffs, and other stakeholders to answer one basic question. Is our pretrial release system actually working the way it's supposed to? That's really what it's all about. But I want to back up for a second because we need to be on the same page when we're talking about pretrial release. So let's say someone gets arrested today. Now, this person hasn't been convicted yet because they haven't even had a trial. And I have to remind you that pretrial release is rooted in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty by a court of law. So it's up to the judge to decide, does that person stay in jail until trial, or can they go home while their case moves through the courts? If the judge does allow that person to go home, there's going to be some rules that they'll have to follow while they're out of jail. They may have to wear an ankle monitor. They may be ordered to stay away from certain people. They'll need to remain in Illinois, and they'll be required to check in with pretrial services. That's called pretrial release. Now, some people might ask, so what's the big problem? Why is there a task force needed? Well, according to the Illinois Supreme Court, there are over 5,000 people currently on electronic monitoring across the state of Illinois. This has created an urgent need to evaluate how this system is working. The task force is going to be reporting back to the Supreme Court to let them know if the judges are using the ankle monitors consistently and how quickly are police responding if someone cuts their ankle monitor off. What happens when someone ignores the rules? Are warrants being served quickly, or are some people falling through the cracks? And if so, why is that happening? Those are just some of the questions that this task force is trying to answer, and they got about 6 weeks to get it done. They're supposed to be reporting their findings back to the Illinois Supreme Court and recommendations by July 24th. This task force lets us know that the Illinois Supreme Court is taking a much closer look at whether electronic monitoring is being used consistently and effectively across the state of Illinois. Why now, you may ask? Well, here's what caught my attention. The Illinois Supreme Court didn't call this a pretrial reform task force. They called it the Pretrial Accountability Task Force. Now, that one word, accountability, it tells us a lot because the court doesn't seem to be asking whether more people should be released or detained. Instead, they're asking, once someone is released before trial, are we making sure that they follow the rules? Now, that's a totally different conversation. And I've reported on a couple of cases where inmates were released during pretrial and proceeded to reoffend, committing violent criminal acts, not only during pretrial release, but while wearing the damn ankle monitor. Now, before we run wild with this does not mean that Illinois is getting rid of the Pretrial Fairness Act. To the contrary, they're actually trying to strengthen it. And this doesn't mean that everyone wearing an ankle monitor is going back to jail. That's not what's happening here. The Illinois Supreme Court has already blessed the pretrial release program, and they're not of the mindset that the law has failed. Right now, They're gathering information. They're trying to figure out what's working and what's not working well in this release program. I think all of us should pay attention to what comes out of this task force, and I'll tell you why. Whether you support the Pretrial Fairness Act or if you think it needs major changes, everyone should want the same thing. If someone's being released before trial, the rules set for their release should actually mean something. If someone follows those rules, great. But if they don't, the system should respond quickly. That's what accountability looks like. For every action, there's a reaction. Now, some of you may be wondering if this task force has anything to do with the Quadajah Johnson case. And the honest answer is nobody outside of the Supreme Court really knows. But I understand why someone would make that connection because the court created this task force, then only 3 days later, they declined to hear the state's appeal in the Quadajah Johnson case. Can we say that one caused the other? No, because there's no evidence of that. But it is interesting because both involve a lot of the same issues surrounding pretrial release and public safety. But regardless of whether or not this task force was prompted by Quadajah Johnson's case, she will definitely be affected by any new rules or restrictions that may be formed after this task force is done. The task force has just 45 days to come back with recommendations. And that's a pretty fast deadline if you ask me. So I'll definitely be following what they recommend because those recommendations could eventually influence how judges across Illinois are going to handle future criminal cases with respect to pretrial release.
Pretrial release is the biggest mind fuck on the planet because you get charged with something and then you get kicked out on pretrial and you're out walking amongst the free folk and you're like, cool. And after a while you lie to yourself and you're like, they're not going to put me in. I'm not going to go to prison. Look how good I'm doing out here. And I just had a friend that got sent to 15 years after being out on pretrial for 5 years and is having a really rough time because how do you go from being let out on the streets? You're obviously not a danger to society because you're out on the streets, but you're going to get 15 years. And so that was a hard thing for me. I was out for 3 years on pretrial and the waiting and the continuances on the government's end. It's a lot. And I don't really have words to help you through that other than you just have to focus on the things that you love. Try to make yourself happy every single day. Go do something that makes you happy. Enjoy your freedom while you have it because you're probably going to prison.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who can use this message. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and leave me a message down below letting me know your thoughts. When someone is released before trial, should the state rely more on ankle monitors, or should judges have more options? Or do you think the system is working just fine? Meet me in the comments. We can continue the conversation there.